This morning you get sort of a homilette from me because our main speaker is Julie Seaver, who is here from Compass for World AIDS Day. But I did want to comment just a little bit on these two readings, on the poem and then on the scripture reading, which is called the Canticle of Zechariah. Both of these readings speak to laying a foundation for what comes next, right? So the Wendell Berry poem talks about if we will have the wisdom to survive, then we can renew the earth. We can make the earth better for those who come after us. And then that beautiful canticle that Zechariah speaks to his son, and you may remember the biblical story, Zechariah, because he laughed when God told him that he and Sarah would have a son, he was struck dumb. He couldn't speak. So the entire time his wife was pregnant with John, he couldn't speak. And the first thing he does speak after John is born, John, who will be the prophet, will prepare the way for Jesus. The very first thing he does speak is this blessing into John's ear. I imagine him just holding the baby and speaking softly into his ear like we all do. Maybe a little bit of baby talk, who knows, because we can't resist it, can we? And speaking these words of blessing, telling this child, knowing from God that this child will be the prophet of the Most High, that will go before God, before Jesus, to make the pathways straight. Imagine how your own parent, God, speaks to you in the same way, reminding you that you are a blessing, that we too are prophets of the Most High God, that it is our work in the world to make the pathways straight for others, to prepare the foundations for those who will come after us. It is something that as a church for LGBTQ people, we take very seriously. We want something to be here for those who come after us because we have been here for 40 years. And we know that our existence saves our own lives as well as others. And so today, my friends, my brief message to you is that remember your foundation. Remember the foundation in love. And let us continue to lay that foundation for all who will come after us. Amen? Amen. Julie. Oh, I'm sorry. Song first. I keep messing this up. And just a word before we start our song, I wanted to let you know that our speaker today is Julie Seaver, the CEO of Compass, our LGBTQ community center here in Palm Beach County down in Lake Worth. And under Julie's direction, that center has really just become literally the hub of our LGBTQ community. And we are so grateful to have her here today because Compass does a ton of work around HIV and AIDS prevention. So it's not just an LGBTQ community center, but it also exists for people who have HIV and AIDS and to continue to do the work of caring for folks and ending the pandemic. Thank you.
When trust in God's imagination to build from blueprints and hope for a dream yet fulfilled.
Glasses, masks, fogging of the masks. So thank you so much, Reverend Marie, and all of you for your invitation here today. I recognize that my time at Compass, while it has not been short, I do also appreciate the fact that I stand upon the shoulders of those who laid the foundation before me. And so I have the wonderful luck and opportunity in this lifetime to learn under the great educators of HIV and AIDS of our time. And one of the first individuals that I had the pleasure and honor of learning from was MCC's very own Chris Lasheri. So I thank you and honor you for your dedication. Means a lot. MCC Church was one of the first churches among those who welcomed and cared for those living with HIV and AIDS, and it was front and center that MCC clergy and parishioners have been providing care for those in our communities. One of the first faith communities providing burial and funeral rites when other churches would not do so. It is a history that runs deep in the Metropolitan Community Church, and we are so grateful that you would honor these display of the AIDS Memorial Quilt here at our church. This year has been especially poignant as we celebrate 40 years of MCC of the Palm Beaches. As no coincidence, as 2021 also marks 40 years since the first few cases of what later became known as AIDS were officially reported. And 40 years later, we honor the more than 36 million people, and including over 700,000 in the United States who have died from AIDS and AIDS-related illnesses globally since the start of the epidemic. So we all have a story to tell, and I wanted to share the first time that I had heard about HIV, or rather at the time AIDS, was back in 1990. At the time, I was 20 years old, and nobody's allowed to do any math today. And I was working as a bartender at a popular restaurant and bar in Fort Lauderdale. And the busy nights, of course, were every weekend, and I always had the closing shifts with my coworker, Sam. And honestly, even though I quietly identified as a lesbian woman, Sam was truly beautiful and stunning to look at. He was always full of laughter, and the most popular bartender with all of the regulars and the young women who would come in just to watch him work. We became fast friends, Sam and I, and we worked great together. He would greet and serve all of the women who were googly-eyed over him, and I would make all of the drinks and work the guys at the bar. And so that was our, undisclosed agreement that we would make the most money by working the room the way that we saw fit. And we grew close very quickly. We both kept a secret from our families and all of our coworkers, and even from each other. One night after work, because I was young, I would meet some other friends to go dancing at a popular nightclub, and I bumped into Sam on that same dance floor. The Copa. So you remember. The Copa was a popular club where mostly gay men and some lesbian women would go to freely be themselves and celebrate into all hours of the night and sometimes the morning. That was the time where you could walk through the dance floor flooded with flashing lights, and every weekend was like another coming out party for those that were there. Celebrating with partners and our chosen families, because that's what our community does, is we have chosen families most of the time. And celebrating our youth and also taking it all for granted. You remember taking our youth for granted, right? The youth is wasted on the young, they say. And it was that night that Sam and I would reveal our true selves to each other and seek joy in just being around other like-minded people in what would become our community. Or at least until the end of the night, when the lights came on and you would see the gaunt faces marked with sarcomas, and you realized that everyone you met or hung out with were actually dying. Cancel culture wasn't really a catchphrase back then, but it was all too prevalent for our community, and more specifically, our gay brothers and siblings who were either infected with the disease or the stigma of the disease. And for the world, the official culture was fear, ignorance, stigma, and above all, denial. A little over a year after I met Sam, he was gone. And I went to his funeral, which was the first funeral I had attended in losing someone to the virus. And honestly, the first funeral that I had ever attended in my life in general, really. And I learned that even in death due to this disease, there was still stigma and there was still denial. That afternoon in the hot Florida sun, I mourned the loss of a larger-than-life person, with strangers and his family who were overcome with grief to his affliction and death due to cancer. The thing about grief is that sometimes it has much in common with psychosis. And we can hear our late loved ones' voices, and we can see and we can feel them in the everyday joys of life. Sometimes we dream about them. That night of Sam's funeral, which was December of 1992, I had a very vivid dream of him going behind a busy packed bar and begging me to follow him. The bar top was shimmering in multicolored holiday lights, surrounded by people clinking cocktails and screaming with laughter. And in my dream, just like in our lifetime, I followed him through the pass-through. And in a moment, he was gone. And so were all of our celebrating friends. It was okay because in that moment in my dream, he was still the beautiful Sam, full of life that I always knew him. But soon after that funeral, loss after loss, funeral after funeral, I went back into the closet and sat with my own grief and losing so many friends, my chosen family, to this disease. It would be years later that I would come to understand that Sam and all of my other friends that I lost during the height of the epidemic could never enter paradise until I stopped grieving for them, let them go, and continued to fight the good fight. So as annually on December 1st, we commemorate World AIDS Day and reflect upon our collective loss, the trauma of the historical lack of government, medical, and familial response, and now we can celebrate the continued hope for the future of the still prevalent but ending the HIV and AIDS epidemic. We were in Key West a few weeks ago for the closing ceremonies of the Smart Ride, which is a fundraiser to benefit 5 benefiting HIV and AIDS service organizations across the state of Florida, including Compass. Glenn Weinzheimer, founder of the ride, addressed the crowd gathering in the closing ceremonies of the Central Square of Key West High School. And in it, he announced the amount that we had fundraised. Again, another fundraiser to end this epidemic. And he said something that sat with me every single day for the last few weeks. Glenn said, "It just ticks me off that in 1 year, the world could respond to COVID-19 because everyone is affected." And when you think about that for a second, those with HIV and AIDS are marginalized because we represent a population that doesn't fit an acceptable stereotype. And I think that his anger was well-founded and should be well-founded. So today, as we consider the theme of equitable access and everyone's voice, we should also commemorate the heroic efforts of the scientists, the policymakers, clinicians, public health workers, and advocates, of those who have paved the way for this work and moved our goal of ending the HIV epidemic from pipe dream to possibility. We must do more and continue to education around U equals U and undetectable equals untransmittable, and the wonder of HIV prevention through pre-exposure prophylactics and PrEP. While we have made tremendous strides towards these small miracles, we also must acknowledge the impact and the trauma of the colliding COVID-19 pandemic and the uncertainty caused by the new variants of the COVID virus. Because, like the COVID virus, HIV and AIDS has made sloppy copies of itself, what we call mutations of the virus, which has made it extremely difficult to make sure that our antiretrovirals and continued medications, even though the improvements that we have made, continue to become a challenge with these mutations of the viruses. And as the COVID pandemic has dominated the world's attention, it has obscured, in my mind, and in many ways eclipsed the health disparities and inequities that drive the HIV pandemic. To be successful, our response to the National HIV and AIDS Strategy must support our shared network of community-based and faith-based HIV and AIDS service organizations, our health departments, clinical providers, all of us who are on the front lines of the colliding HIV and COVID-19 pandemics. We must create a national and worldwide effort to end HIV and AIDS with the same conviction and sustained efforts that give way to heart disease, asthma, diabetes, cancer, and other illnesses. And as we honor and remember those today, please keep in mind that our fight is not over. Thank you all to have stood up and continue to defend our community, MCC Church of the Palm Beaches work in the Kevin McGee Drop-In Center, the enormous efforts of your food distribution program for those less fortunate, the Long-Term Survivors Network, and to our friends and neighbors who took a stance and made sure that those who were affected with HIV and AIDS could live healthier in their communities and in their own self-truth. Our community is not just a group of people. It's about how we come together with our shared experiences and our shared history. Fostering a togetherness that nurtures our souls, our sense of trust, belonging, our safety, and our caring for each other. And finally, it is our collective loss, our grief, and even our resilience that brings us together for one common goal each year on World AIDS Day: to bring dignity and grace back to those who have been affected by the stigma and health disparities caused by HIV and AIDS. So again, I would like to thank you to all of you and those who have paved the way and laid the foundation for this fight to end the epidemic. And Compass will be here as long as we need to. Hopefully, we'll work ourselves out of a job someday, and working and caring for those individuals living and ultimately striving with HIV and AIDS. Thank you.